think we can start. Hi everyone, welcome to this first capacity building event of the YEPA, the Youth Entrepreneurship Policy Academy. It's a pleasure to reconnect after the quite nice launching event we had in March. Our first the first barrier we'll tackle for young entrepreneurs will be access to finance, and this is the topic of today. We already had the group A yesterday with a specific focus on microcredit. Today will be slightly different, but I will, you have seen the agenda, but I will also let the other speakers briefly mention what this is about. And now, in order to start this webinar, I would like to pass the floor to Ruth Passerman. You remember her from the launching event. Ruth is a director at the European Commission, director for funds, programming and implementation. Ruth, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julien, and welcome everybody. This is as Julien said, is the first capacity building event. After the event in March. Youth unemployment remains high in several places of the EU, and we must act, and helping to the creation of self-employed business activity is part of the solution. Now, our ambition with this academy is to trigger policy changes in favor of youth, thanks to a better mutual understanding between policymakers, experts, and youth representatives. Today's session is dedicated to access to finance for young entrepreneurs. There is indeed one of the most serious obstacles that has been identified, if not the only one. According to a Eurobarometer survey we conducted recently, nearly 4 out of 10 respondents said that one important reason that stops young people from becoming entrepreneurs is not having enough capital resources to be self-employed. And indeed, most entrepreneurs finance their startup with funding from the 3 Fs, the founder, the friends, and the family. Besides these, other solutions exist and will be explored. Now, today, after general presentations of the tool available, the focus will be on university students wanting to spin out a company based on their research. This is rather a niche area, but it can give very high value results. We all have in mind some success story, mostly from the US rather than from Europe, unfortunately. Spin-off companies transform technological inventions developed from university research that are likely to remain unexploited otherwise. Spin-offs contribute to entrepreneurial university ecosystems. We will reflect with you today and listen carefully how this could also inspire us. And we would be particularly interested to know if spin-offs can follow the path also of social entrepreneurship. Because indeed, access to finance is particularly challenged for young social entrepreneurs. Lenders and investors often struggle with assessing the level of risk of youth and social entrepreneurship projects. Now, within DG Employment, we try to improve the situation. We offer comprehensive financial and non-financial support for social entrepreneurs, and notably for young entrepreneurs, as well as for their financiers, by reducing the transaction costs when providing business development support services. Now, through the Social Investment and Skills window of InvestEU program, we have launched products that support financial intermediaries who are financing or investing in social enterprises. Our main implementing partner in this respect is the European Investment Fund. National authorities can also do a lot and design access to finance aid schemes in compliance with state aid rules. The Commission has just proposed this last week, a Council recommendation on developing social economy framework conditions. And in this recommendation, there is indeed a chapter on access to public and private funding. Now, this is the proposal of the Commission. We now hope that the member states will support it in the Council. Okay, I just stop here. I think that's enough for introduction. I'm sure you will have very interesting debate. You have in the program also a practical exercise, the hackathon. So I wish you also inspiration and energy. We will have two other occasions to discuss, as access to finance, unfortunately, is only one of the barriers. The Academy will also be looking, for example, at the lack of entrepreneurial skills, which is another big barrier. Thanks a lot, and I give the floor now to Jonathan Porter, who is the head of the unit dealing with entrepreneurship policy and analysis at the OECD. Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ruth. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's great to see you all, and to be doing this first workshop, which is the first time we're really getting our hands into this in terms of the EU OECD Youth Entrepreneurship Policy Academy. And as we've been saying, access to finance is the topic today. And you've chosen a very interesting niche, which is about how to get finance to young people who are trying to carry an idea, knowledge intensive sort of startup, carry an idea into the market and prototype and sell it, and how to get the financing to them. That's a very interesting topic, and it doesn't just have to be your own research. It can be that as a student, you take into the market the research of your professor. Now, I don't know if you'll get into that, but finance is clearly a big barrier. We're going to cover other topics in the next workshops, like coaching and training and how to deliver policy to young people. You can shape these workshops. We would like to know what issues you want to cover, and we'll tailor the agendas of these workshops to what you're interested in. But I'm glad that we're all engaged in this exercise of exploring youth entrepreneurship policy, and that the European Commission and the OECD have come together to do this YEPA, because we know that young people suffer greatly in the transition to work and in the labour market, and that the unemployment rates of young people are twice those of adults, and they have been for several decades. And as soon as you have a crisis, a global shock like the global financial crisis or the COVID crisis, it's the youth rates that shoot up the most. And so we need to find solutions, and self-employment, starting a business, is clearly part of that sort of set of solutions. It won't work for everybody, and it won't necessarily lead to running an enterprise for life, but it has been shown to improve the labour market outcomes of young people. So we're doing this session today. Be aware that there's a lot of other material, that the collaboration between the European Commission, DG Employment, and the OECD since 2011, this collaboration on inclusive entrepreneurship, it has generated a lot of material and ideas already, which we can help to disseminate here. You can search under inclusive entrepreneurship on Google, and you'll find a lot of this material. Just to signal, the Missing Entrepreneurs publications come out every 2 years, and there's a pillar on youth in it, as well as women, immigrants, and other groups. And we have an EU OECD Better Entrepreneurship Policy tool. I think you need to go to www.betterentrepreneur.eu, and there's a self-assessment tool for policymakers there, and guidance. Just to finish, just to say that youth has risen up the policy agenda, the political agenda. As one aspect of the proof of that, our meeting of ministers, which we only hold these things every 4 or 5 years, the OECD ministerial meeting on SME and entrepreneurship policy, will be having a deep discussion about diversity in entrepreneurship and creating equal opportunities in entrepreneurship. And we will be talking about youth entrepreneurs and what can be done. So if you're a sort of a brainstorm machine here in this workshop, then we can carry those ideas to government. Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you very much, John. Now, as you will remember, each workshop has a host. And so the host for today's workshop is Andre, who's from the Science and Technology Park of the University of Porto in Portugal. So I'll let him briefly introduce himself and welcome everyone to the workshop. Andre, over to you.
Hi everyone, and thank you, David, and thank you to everyone who's attending the workshop. I think this is really important, not only because of what UPTEC does, obviously as a science and technology park of the University of Porto. We need to look into the students who are getting out of the university, looking into the market and starting to create their own businesses. But we also need to improve on what we've been doing over the years. And most of this improvement, we're beginning to believe it's not only on our hands, but also on the hands of all policymakers, make it easier for young entrepreneurs to access new tools to create their own businesses. So this is, I mean, this is really exciting. I won't get into details about what UPTEC is or does, because I have my colleague Francisca here to do that part and to tell you a little bit of what we do to stir things up a little bit. And then the most important part, I believe, is benchmarking and looking into new cool ways of doing stuff and maybe getting a little bit inspired. And I believe that this workshop is doing a little bit of that. And I'm also really excited and looking forward to sharing a case that I brought to you. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's do this.
All right, great. Thanks, Andre. So everybody has received the agenda as well as a background note. And I just want to very briefly walk through the agenda so that everybody knows what's happening today. So the first event is going to be with Helen. She's going to do a little warm up with us, get us going, get our brains thinking, get us active. And then we're going to have a quick presentation of the note. Now, the note aims to give you a bit of background information. And of course, access to finance is a very large topic with lots of sub-issues. Today, we're going to be emphasizing support for innovative startups, but of course, there are a lot of other topics. Yesterday, in the workshop for the first group, we looked more at microfinance, and that was recorded, and that will be put onto the website, so you can all access that. And just a reminder, we're going to be producing a note as well after. So we're going to be expanding the background note to incorporate some of the content from the 3 group workshops on access to finance, and you'll get additional materials through that. There is also, of course, as John noted, a wealth of material that the OECD and the EU have produced as part of this project. So just very briefly, the agenda is going to be as was shared. Some of the names have shifted around. So Francisca will be presenting the activities of the Science and Technology Park. Andre will be presenting a case study on, let's call it GovTech, which is a bit of an innovation in Portugal. So we'll learn about what they did and how that worked and what went well and what didn't work. We'll take a break in about 1 hour. We'll take a 15-minute pause, and then we'll come back for a little hackathon activity where we'll work in smaller groups. So without further ado, I will give the floor over to Helen.
Thank you, David. So as you should be able to see on the screen, we're going to jump right in with a quick Mentimeter quiz. So if you can just scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code 8957355. We'll just go through a few questions to take the temperature of the room and see what we're looking forward to learning today. Just going to move to the next slide. You should still be able to see the QR code. We'll let a few more people join before I launch the first question. Let's see. Great. Okay, we're up to a good number. So if you can continue to join and respond to the question, will not deter. So the first question is, rank what you are most familiar with in terms of topics regarding access to finance. The first being microfinance, fintech, procurement, innovation grants, tax incentives and relief, and financial literacy. We should be able to see the results live on the screen as they come in to see where everyone's coming from today. There we go. Financial literacy is topping it off for the moment. Microfinance is a close one. Oh, it's moving quite a bit. Well, great. It looks like everyone is pretty knowledgeable, so this should be a great discussion for today. Please share with us your insights and expertise as we go along. The other workshops talked about microfinance, and even though that's not our topic of discussion today, feel free to contribute what you know in the group breakout sessions or in the chat below. All right, and the second question is, what would you like to know more about? So what areas are you interested in learning or expanding your knowledge? Maybe you aren't as strong in these areas and other people in this group might have the solutions or ideas that you're looking for. So this is an open question. You can write anything that you are interested in learning. Good practices, sharing best practices. It's always a good one to do in a peer learning network. How to work with government, private investment, social financing. Crowdfunding, great, you're in luck. We will talk about crowdfunding in the discussion note that you will get after the workshops. Funding small scale-up projects. Facilitating cooperation with young entrepreneurs and private banks, risks. This is great. We will try to get to all of these, and like David mentioned, the discussion note will take into account the things we've talked about across all three of the workshops. So if we don't mention it in today's session, you will still have an opportunity to read what was happening in the other two sessions as well. And the last slide is if there's anything else you want to discuss and cover, do not forget to put it into the Zoom chat. So feel free to use it throughout today's session in the large group or the breakout group. It is there for you, and we will be taking notes. So thank you very much, and I'll pass the floor back to David.
Great, thank you, Helen. So now that we've started to think about the different issues and sub-issues, I prepared a short presentation to walk you through the background note, just in case you didn't have a chance to look at it. And I've also drawn on the new Eurobarometer survey to paint a picture of young entrepreneurs and what their needs are, just to underline the importance of finance and access to finance for young entrepreneurs. So here we go. I think you can see my screen now. So what I wanted to do is just start with a question that came up a lot in our kickoff meetings a few weeks ago, was who are young entrepreneurs and what exactly are we talking about? And so when I was thinking about how to respond to this question, it occurred to me that there are actually two slightly different responses. One is from the policy perspective, because programs are targeted at certain age groups, and the other is a statistical perspective, which is how information is collected. So if we start with policy, in the EU, I would say the standard definition would be 15 to 29 years old. And that is the definition that is used in a lot of the EU policies and strategies around young people. So I'm talking about the Youth Guarantee, the Youth Employment Initiative, and others. But we do have to note that not everyone follows these definitions strictly in their national programs, nor even in the implementation of some of the EU initiatives. So if you look at some of the southern EU member states where unemployment rates are very high for young people, sometimes there's cases where the definition, at least the upper end, has been extended even up into 40 or 45 for some programs. So if you look at Spain, for example, some of the youth entrepreneurship initiatives for young people in Spain consider those even in their early 40s to be young people. There are, of course, differences outside of the EU as well. If you look in North America, sometimes the definition does go into the 30s as well. If you remember, we had the program from Canada at the event in Brussels, and there the definition that they use goes into their 30s, for example. Now, statistics in the EU tends to follow what we have for the policy definition, which is 15 to 29. Now, if you don't know, Eurostat has a new youth portal in which they produce a lot of statistics on all elements of life for young people in the EU. So if you haven't seen it and you're looking for information, I really encourage you to check it out. And essentially everything there uses 15 to 29 years old. I will note, however, that in the collaboration that we've noted already today between the OECD and the EU, in our work, we tend to have a lower cutoff of 20 years old. And the reason that we do that is that we're making a distinction between sort of employment, labor market, and entrepreneurship policy and education policy, because our target policymakers are most often in the ministries of labor. And so we're putting the education part a little bit on the side, but of course it is still very much relevant to our discussions. And so if you want to cover that in the workshops, we can certainly pick that up. Now, to expand slightly on this picture of who are the young entrepreneurs in the EU, I just wanted to show you a few figures to give you a bit of an understanding. So the first one is, how many young people want to be entrepreneurs? Is this something that is widespread, or are we really talking about a small group of young people? And we can see that overall in the EU, we're at nearly 40% of young people, that would be 15 to 30 years old, have indicated that they would prefer to be self-employed over working as an employee. So that's the EU average in the white bar. And of course, there are significant differences across the countries. If you look at Spain, we've got 20% of young people prefer to be self-employed. And there are a handful, Greece, Croatia, Portugal, Lithuania, Cyprus, on the right-hand side, where you have more than half. So the reason, of course, is not always straightforward, but it usually has to do with culture, usually has to do with opportunities and strength in the labor market. And so we can talk about that later if you're interested, but for now we keep moving. The most frequent reason for wanting to be self-employed is one of independence. They want to be their own boss. But of course, individual preference on the organization of work is important, as is the personal fulfillment from bringing an idea to life. And the survey includes many other reasons as well. If you go down the list, you get to social entrepreneurship, for example, at about 16%. People want to have a social impact. Now, coming to finance, as we've heard in the introduction, the main sources of finance would be the 3 Fs. This is identified in the vast majority of research, and we do see it here in this survey. Now, the question is, if you were to start up a business, where would you look to get your startup financing? So the number one response would be my own savings, more than 1/3 of people. Banks were number 2, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. Family and friends at number 3, and then my current salary at number 4. Now, we do have to note that it is fairly common for entrepreneurs to use personal lines of credit, credit cards, and so on. So that could explain why the banks are so high on this list. If you look down the list, we get crowdfunding, governments at spots 5 and 6, and then all the way down to VC at the right. So I think one of the takeaway points is that, we often hear a lot about VC and crowdfunding and all these new innovations in fintech, but actually there are very few people who are currently using these types of resources to finance their new startups. However, they are quite important when we're thinking about how can we improve access to finance for young people. If you look at the responses that are the most frequently cited, your own savings, family and friend, banks even, there are essentially hard limits on that. You only have so much savings and it's hard to squeeze out any more from your bank account once it's empty. So if we're looking to increase the supply to young people, we do need to look further down the list to public institutions, crowdfunding, microfinance, and so on. So this is just a split across countries. It's the same top 3. We can see my own savings varies quite significantly, quite low in France, but quite high in Malta. So I'll just let you look at that quickly before we carry on. And the Eurobarometer survey also asks about, if you were to start up a business, what type of support would you need? And here are the responses. Financial support was number 1, but here it says grants. So they made a distinction between different types of financial support. Grants was number 1. And if you have to go all the way down to the right, be able to find loan programs and microfinance. So young people are looking for grants that would be funding without any conditions. So it's a controversial topic. We can perhaps have a brief discussion on it if we're interested. On the one hand, there are a lot of questions about whether the incentives are right if you give a young person a grant. Are they going to use the money effectively relative to giving them a loan that they have to repay? Does that change their behavior? There's also an issue from the public finance perspective. If you're giving out money, you're not going to get anything returned. So it's a complete expenditure without any recovery. On the other hand, there are people that argue that it's an investment and that you're investing in the experience of somebody to help lead to a better outcome in the future. And there are, of course, certain scenarios in which you might want to make targeted investments, such as innovation grants, to help stimulate innovation and commercialize new innovations so that there's a greater spillover effects for the whole economy and benefits to everybody. So that is just a quick word on grants. There's a little bit of discussion in the note. And of course, there are other issues, and we'll pick up some of those today as we talk about innovative startups by young people, because grants is one way in which they can be supported. So just very briefly, why do young people face challenges in accessing finance? Well, there are issues on both the supply and demand side of the market. On the demand side, that is the perspective of the entrepreneur. Young people often have skills gaps in the area of entrepreneurship. That often is due to a lack of experience in entrepreneurship, but also more broadly in the labor market. They don't know how to operate a business. They don't know how to make decisions. They don't know how to evaluate risk. They don't know where to go to get their startup financing. So we can overcome that with coaching and training to help overcome that gap in experience. The lower levels of experience also result in smaller and less diverse networks in which you might expect an entrepreneur to turn to if they need help accessing resources. So if young people have smaller networks, they're probably going to have more difficulties going through people they know to identify sources of financing. Of course, a shorter history in work also means they probably have lower levels of savings and less collateral to offer for debt financing. And finally, the last point is a bit of a repetition of the first one. They don't have experience searching for finance, and so they don't know where to look. They don't know how to go about doing it, and they probably don't know how to sell their business idea and how to communicate their plans. On the supply side, from the perspective of lenders and investors, it's difficult to assess the risk of a new startup by a young person because they don't have much of a track record. They don't have a pattern of established behavior which can be used to predict future behavior. So there are a lot of questions, and the result is that young people often get denied, or it costs them much more to access debt. Transaction costs can be high for young entrepreneurs who are starting small projects. Both debt and equity have fixed costs associated with that. And so if a young entrepreneur is looking for a smaller amount of money, that fixed cost is a higher proportion of the cost of the transaction for the lender or investor, which makes it less profitable and therefore either more expensive to give to the young person, or they just don't do it. Third, there could be investor bias for some profiles of young people. There is some experimental research that shows investor bias related to gender, as well as migration status. Might be a case for some young people as well. And then finally, we've talked a lot about the different types of business models that young people are using. We talked a lot about that in Brussels a few months ago. And so there is a challenge for some of these newer business types in that the financial instruments that are available to them don't necessarily match very well with the objectives of what's called a business activity, but it might be some sort of social organization that is not your classical business. So if you want any more details of that, I will refer you to the references in the background note. We've got a lot more material where you can get much more detail. And then very briefly, just to look at what governments are doing. And I put it here in two sides, on the left and right. And on the left, we've got a very large range of financial instruments, ranging from grants, soft loans, microfinance, all the way up to helping to build angel investor networks up to risk capital, which would usually be larger, often, equity investments. So governments are active doing all of these activities, not necessarily all at once in all countries, but there is a wide range of instruments, wide range of use. And often these are paired with non-financial supports. So that would be training or coaching. And for young people, they're often delivered in integrated packages. So you would get a microcredit loan with coaching bundled together. But there are also cases where the support is sequenced, where access to a grant might be conditioned on the completion of a training program, for example. So there are different ways in which you can do this. And the evaluation evidence tends to suggest that there is a benefit to packaging the non-financial supports with the financial support. And there is also evidence to support just financial support on its own. Is quite clear that there is a positive impact on the startup, although a lot of the evaluation evidence tends to suggest it can be short-term, a couple of years, and then it dissipates. So today we're going to be talking about supporting innovative startups, and I just put a little bit of a menu on the screen here. We can talk over it briefly, and we'll pick up further details in the presentations as we go. Now, I put two categories. One is essentially offered directly by government, and these would be innovation grants. And these tend to be larger grants that are offered to projects that meet certain criteria. They're usually commercializing research. And if you think of some of the larger well-known examples like Exist in Germany, they often use competitive mechanisms to award the grant. So it's not anyone that applies gets the money. It's a competition in which only the top applications are given the funding. There are growing examples of equity investment from governments. This could be risk capital. There are also seed capital programs. I'm thinking of Poland, for example. And for young students, higher education, local governments tend to be quite active, setting up matchmaking events, often in collaboration with the universities. And of course, the fourth point is that there's often the infrastructure that helps to facilitate the interaction between investors and entrepreneurs and researchers. And so it's necessary for government to invest in building that infrastructure at all levels of government. And it's also important to recognize that the corporate sector is quite active. And so that suggests that some government should build partnerships with the corporate sector. So I'm thinking of Google Campus, for example. There's a Google Campus in Warsaw, and there's very close relationships with the local government and these corporate actors. So that's one way in which the government can support. The second way is sort of through the higher education system. And we'll hear about that from the case study at the University of Porto. But in short, there are certainly networking and matchmaking activities through incubators and accelerators and other business centers that you might find on campus. Awards and competition programs, which you award funding to different categories of entrepreneurs that meet certain criteria. And then, of course, there's directing to other support centers in the local area, which is a little bit what I was talking about before, building an infrastructure in which the government is one partner with all of the other sectors working together. So I will stop there, and I hopefully have whet your appetite for the rest of the discussion today. Happy to take any questions now, if there are any, and you could either take the microphone or put it into the chat. And if there aren't any questions, we'll move on in the agenda. So we'll pause for a few seconds, give you a chance. 3, 2, 1, no takers, as far as I can see. So we will move on to Francisca, who will talk about the University of Porto and how they are working to support the young entrepreneurs in the various programs access finance. And I will foreshadow this a little bit by saying that it's a very interesting case study because they use some well-known traditional techniques, but often they do it in the way that is opposite to what you might expect. So pay attention. I hope you find it interesting. Francisca, I'll pass the floor over to you.
Yes, thank you, David. So please just confirm that you can see my screen. Yes, okay, thank you for nodding. So I'll try to be as brief as I was supposed to be, as I am supposed to be. So I'll present you, as David said, what we do at the Science and Technology Park of the University of Porto. So quickly, we were created by the University of Porto with this mission to foster the creation and development of business projects in all these areas, arts, science, and technologies, which makes us one of a kind, especially here in Portugal, because we don't leave anyone behind. Since we were created in 2007, yes, we've been supporting more than 700 projects. I'll run quickly through the slides, and if you have any questions, we can cover it by the end. Every year, roughly, so these are the numbers for 2022, every year, roughly, we have about 200 projects in-house, and more than 50% of our community is companies and projects that come from foreign companies. So it makes our ecosystem not just very diverse sector-wise, but also diverse national-wide. And there's a lot of people, as you can see, working here on a daily basis. How do we do this? So this infographic really depicts it all. So the integration of this multidisciplinary community. How we do this? So we try to split it up in 6 different steps, but it's all mingled. But anyway, we have to split it up to explain it. So first of all, because we were created by the university, To promote this connection with the University of Porto is something that we are very keen to do, and and some companies really seek us for this, because we do this in several ways. So not just the connection with the research centers, but also the collaboration, sometimes tighter, sometimes a bit more looser, depending on the sectors, with PhD courses, master students, training programs that we do with the university, the support to all the spin-offs. So this is honestly not something very special for us. I would say that most technology parks with a link with the university do it, but of course we try to do it as best as we can. Then mentoring and business development. So we have a whole team just to promote this. We don't do it just on our own. So we promote this interaction with all the different stakeholders that are part of our ecosystem. If you remember, I told you roughly 200 projects every year. So there's a lot of people from different sectors, a lot of knowledge in-house. So we just try to promote this networking and this mentoring with the different people. And why? Because, and I mentioned projects, not companies, we have different types of projects with different maturities in-house. So we have the standard startups, we have anchor projects, which are, let's say, startups that evolved up to a stage that are so relevant, and what they do is so valuable for us here in the park that we invite them to stay so that they settle here as anchor projects. And we have also innovation centers, so much more mature companies that are stable in the markets, and they have their own ID departments covering up the creation of new projects, of new products or services within the market. So this diversity of maturities, sectors, and even the way at which the companies are here in the park, so an office space with labs, co-working or virtual, makes us have, I would say, a very special ecosystem with a lot of knowledge that could be put together so that the different stakeholders mentor themselves. We also have a bunch of strategic partnerships. So we invite external parties to be part of our ecosystem so that we promote and we foster, we maximize this mentoring, these opportunities. And we do this in different sectors, let's put it this way. So we have external partners with respect to talent, so that we provide our companies easy access to talent in different ways, so not just national-wide, but also internationally. So access to talent, young talent, but also senior talent with other types of partnerships. We have partnerships with external companies and also sometimes with companies installed here at UPTEC, so that our installed projects have easy access to tech or financial services within the market, so that they could profit from the fact that they are here to have special conditions. And also, this is very valuable for our community, easy access to intellectual property and legal advice, especially if we talk about labor contracts or going international, because the law in each country varies and it can have an impact on the business development. So we do bring along to the community external parties to support our companies. We're also part of several cooperation networks. There are more, but we cannot put it on here on the slide. So we get along other partners and other parks like us, spread in different sectors and spread within the world, so that we have, let's say, a presence here and there, so that we facilitate access of our companies to other networks. Finally, and we're almost getting there, so events and networking. So it's a big part of what we do. So we promote a lot of events and networking, because truth is that the value is here within the people that live here every day. So this is a summary of some of the events that we do. I'll focus, and David already mentioned it, I'll focus on the two first kind of events signposted here, so the bridging and investors. So I'll quickly mention what we do. on the Blah Blah Breakfast Cheers and UPTEC Nonstop. So it's just networking events for our internal community. So Blah Blah Breakfast, we pay breakfast for everyone and we invite people to talk on a specific area and sector. Cheers is when we welcome the newcomers to the community so that they have the chance to present themselves to the ones that are already here in the park. And UPTEC Nonstop is one of our, let's say, open events to the community. We invite the Portuguese innovation community and stakeholders to come in-house, and we allow our companies to do pitching. It's really a non-stop pitching event. And now, I'll quickly run so that we get to what you're looking for. We also have knowledge sharing programs. So in the past, well, more than 10 years, in the past 12 years, we've been promoting also knowledge sharing programs with other partners so that both us, UPTEC, and our community and other stakeholders within our region can foster this entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem. So we have the School of Startups. It's, I would say, an acceleration program. So we do it both for entrepreneurs and for researchers so that we have different focus and different profiles, because then we adjust and tailor the sessions depending on the mindset. So entrepreneurs that have a business idea, so they still have, they already have the guts and the sensitivity to go into a business creation, and also with researchers that they have the knowledge, but they lack some of the entrepreneurial skills. So we do both ways. We also do immersive programs, both for startups and scale-ups, and also within corporate ecosystem, let's put it this way. So we do it on demand, let's do it this way. And then so I'm halfway, getting into what you want to hear. I mentioned when we passed through the slide of the events that two of the big events that we do here at UPTEC are focused on this access to finance and matchmaking. So this is especially the focus of today's session. So in being as Portuguese sailors since old time, so how do young entrepreneurs and startups could sail and could navigate this difficult hardship of fundraising? So there are different doubts, questions, different, million-dollar questions that could be answered. So how do we pitch? Is pitching relevant? The skills, and do we have the experience? How do we know what the VCs want? So there are several questions, and we cannot answer all. So I'm going to present you the two ways at which we try to promote this fundraising and to promote the success of our startups looking for funding. So how do we do this? Investors Day. So as David mentioned, we do it the other way around. So these are the three main ingredients of an Investor Day. It's a day at which we invite, you can see on the first picture, we invite VCs, and we put the VCs pitching to the startups. So we do it the other way around. So there's a kind of a round table. They have to present themselves, present their investment thesis. Then we promote networking moments so that both the VCs and the startups get to know each other and interact with each other. And then we promote curated one-on-one meetings between the startups and the VCs. So in detail, how do we do this? So, well, I mentioned it all before. So we do the other way around. So the uncomfortable position of having to pitch and having to sell themselves, it's the VC who has to do it, not the startup and our companies, but they have to do it. We try to put together different VCs so that they don't compete with each other, so that we have in the same panel different VCs investing in different types of companies. And we try to prevent this mismatch that sometimes happens with startups and VCs. So then the startups apply to meet on a one-on-one with a VC, and we try to do this first, let's say, filter, so that we know beforehand the investment thesis, we know the company, so we try to prevent that there is a mismatch and that no one is losing their time. And then this one-on-one meeting is very, very relevant, and it's something very special, because both the investors They see a value because they can feed the pipeline, even if sometimes the startups are not yet ready to be invested, but still they get to know them and they get to start to build up a relationship with them. And also for the companies, this is very relevant because it's totally different for them to get a 30 minutes meeting with a VC, being backed by UPTEC, or trying to do this meeting without being backed by UPTEC. Anyway, this is not okay. Anyway, there's still room to improve. We know that we have to improve the way we've been doing it. So even the pitching sessions, and we did it also with a pitching session from the startups in between the one-on-one sessions and the reverse pitching. So we still have to improve a bit on it. And we've noticed, and that relates to one of the questions that we had on the previous slides, that even those 30 minutes that the startups have with the VCs, sometimes it's tough for them for 30 minutes to prove to the VCs that they are a good bet. So we do have to promote and to support our startups on profiting the most on this 30 minutes meeting. And one way to do it is to improve their pitching capabilities, let's put it this way. And then the networking moments, well, I would say that this is not new. It's one of the most important things that we have to promote and to allow the startups and the VCs to network informally, because then good relationships arrive. Then finally, the bridging. Although it's not focused on fundraising, it's one kind of event that we do that also supports, let's say, indirect ways for our companies to get access to funds. So how do we do it? Again, 3 ingredients. So we create the environment at which big corporate companies challenge and present challenges to our community. Then we present these challenges to our community. We allow, once again, as we did before, we allow our startups to apply for this one-on-one meeting with the corporate to answer a specific challenge. And then we do the follow-up so that that matchmaking that was made between the corporate and the startup based on a challenge, that there will be a follow-up on this. And why is this also matching the fundraising theme? Because it's not that they are asking specifically for a ticket to be invested, but still it's a way for the startups to have access to direct or indirect way, getting funds to further develop their projects, a pilot, a prototype within a specific context, with the inputs also from the corporate company, that sometimes it's more valuable than even the money. And also then the fact that there's a relationship being built between the corporate and the startup, it's also relevant for them to be indirectly, once again, mentored by a possible or a future customer, and also a way for the corporate to have access to talent, to knowledge, and to expertise through us, UPTEC. Again, still room to improve because we know we're not doing it perfectly. We've been doing this in a specific way, but that one way to improve it would be to do it sectorial. So to cover the whole supply chain, so that this way we could promote the construction of big consortium with all the stakeholders involved within a specific sector. We noticed that the canvas that we've been using, so let's say the support, this is just to facilitate, to take notes, so that both the corporate company and the startups, they can have something to start up. So it's not just a conversation, so that at the end of this conversation, there's something written to kickstart a conversation from there onwards. And also then the need to network. Once again, it's hard work, it's business, let's put it this way, but then to talk with a glass of wine, it's also relevant to foster this networking. And that's it. So 15 minutes, any questions? Open both me and Andre to answer anything.
Great, thank you very much, Francisca. I think that in the interest of time, we will pass to the second presentation, and then we'll take questions on both once we've got through both of the presentations. So I have lots of questions, and hopefully others do too. We can put them in the chat so we don't forget. And while people are doing that, we will invite Andre to take the floor, who's going to tell us about an experiment, maybe I would say, an innovation in Portugal. Andre, why don't you tell us about the GovTech example?
Thank you, David. Maybe I will introduce you to GovTech as how I came across it. I've not always worked for UPTEC. Previous to this life, I used to work for Startup Portugal, which is an agency that supports startups within the Ministry of Economy in Portugal. And while working for Startup Portugal, we always used to look into other cases of innovation and grants for innovation that were directed to startups. And GovTech did really well. Most of our attention went to this program because how innovative it was. Back then, we're talking about the Portuguese government launching a cryptocurrency and participatory-based kind of investment simulation for citizens to invest in new projects. So this was really interesting at the time, and I was fortunate enough to pay close attention to how it develops. And so I have obviously a lot of opinions on it. I will try to make this presentation as bland and unbiased as possible. I will let you know, for starters, that I failed miserably at trying at this. But I believe this is a really interesting benchmark on how we can look forward to new types of investment. So let's get straight into it. Just some context, the program was launched in 2018, and it's important to say, and again, me failing miserable at being unbiased, this is a terrible case for marketing, because GovTech is a really specific sector in innovation, and GovTech was the name of the program, and it doesn't really relate to GovTech per se, you know, so it's not exactly a sector. And I'll get into it a little bit later on, but it was an innovation program and grants designed and managed by the Secretary of State for Administrative Modernization, Graça Fonseca, back then, and co-managed by the Agency for Administrative Modernization as well. So the GovTech was a contest. In the end, it was designed not exactly for GovTech solutions, but for solutions that were addressing the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, so the 17 SDGs. In the end, 3 startups would be awarded with prize money, and all the MVPs that were proposed for the contest would have to be backed by a business model. So it was not the innovation or the product per se. The product needed to have a business model that would self-sustain the project in the end. And the finalists would be selected based on citizen participation. So this is important because in the end, it wasn't the citizens who selected the winners, but they selected the finalists who went to the final pitching event. The award was simple. It was 30K in prize money, a protocol signed with the Portuguese state to develop and test the MVPs, incubation contracts with a certified entity. This is important. In Portugal, incubators are certified to implement specific grants and programs from the government that want to support entrepreneurship, from visas to startup vouchers and that kind of thing. So this protocol would be signed with such an entity. UPTEC is one of these, by the way. There would be internationalization support, namely through access to Web Summit and a partnership with Web Summit, which is a big event happening around entrepreneurship and startups and technology in Portugal. So where I feel like this is really innovative was this was the first program that I heard of, at least, and obviously I might not be the most knowledgeable person, but in Portugal it was the first one that I heard that used crypto assets. It was a token to ensure citizen participation. So how it happened was the citizens that wanted to be investors and quote unquote in this term would have to go into the GovTech website, claim their tokens, and use these tokens to invest in the projects that they felt were more that were more deserving of this value. The token has no real value besides the democratic value, which is value per se. Around 5 million of them were issued. Almost all of them were used. So around 400,000 were not used or not used to invest in these companies. It reached around 2,000 people that were invited to participate through these tokens, and 113 companies ended up applying to GovTech. The voting system was all because of not only of the all crypto background, but the voting system was all done through blockchain, a blockchain that was developed specifically for this purpose by the Portuguese government, not by, but for the Portuguese government. There were 3 winners, and I felt that I needed to share this because it may give us some insights on how to think more critically about the program. So one of these was a semi-autonomous robot to clean and maintain forests and prevent wildfires, which in Portugal is a big issue. This project in Portugal, Vida Saudável para Todos, was a nutritional product developed by scientists to prevent strokes and heart disease. And Bio2Skin was an adhesive material, like a medical adhesive for medical application that used biomaterials. So it was a little more advanced than what we have in the market. Again, and me failing a little bit on being unbiased, but this is where I feel that the Portuguese government had a big chance to go a little bit further with this program and didn't really develop it. And it's important to note that Portugal, as we speak, at this point had no regulation whatsoever for cryptocurrency. So there was a little bit more to improve, but there was also this caveat where they were threading on thin ice. We need to say it like this. So the first thing that I feel like it fell a little bit short was that the citizen investment gesture was only used for the first phase. So how it happened was almost 2,000 people voted, and this vote did not translate to the solutions in itself. What happened was 10 startups were invited for a final pitching event afterwards with a jury of 45 people. And this might tweak a little bit the results maybe of the final out of the awarded projects, because they were, if I may say it, rather traditional startups in the Portuguese context. They were health tech and focused on immediate problems, or really that had a lot of media attention, mostly wildfires, because back in 2018, wildfires was a huge problem in Portugal, with a lot of people dying due to them. So this might have a little bit of weight in how the whole program was developed. The other parts that I felt that it could have been improved on was if there was a prize money of 90K available for this, maybe there could have been a correlation between the token or the crypto assets and this prize money to be distributed by all the investors that signed up for this program, all the almost 2,000 people. who had the opportunity to contribute to this program that was really, really interesting in that case. So this was something that fell a little bit short because they created the gamification side of simulating a crowdfunding kind of scenario where people would invest in companies. But in the end, the tokens were rendered useless by how the program was designed and developed afterwards. And with this decision, I feel that the pre-market validation that usually crowdfunding renders to these products was also ignored. And this was something that maybe was an opportunity to take on. In that sense, also, the whole blockchain tokenization and so forth was a little bit useless in the end, so there was an opportunity to build something on top of this, but it was not exactly necessary for the voting process. It didn't translate to value for the citizens besides the participation or for the startups. In the end, there was also the 400,000 tokens that were not used, remained not used, and because they had no inherent value to them. There was also no information on how the process selecting the finalists went, so we don't know exactly which companies were more voted by the citizens who decided to participate in the GovTech program. And because of this, we also don't have any idea if there was a match between investors and what the juries decided in the end that were the most deserving winners of the GovTech program. And yeah, I think I talked a little bit too much already. There's a lot of things that I would like to answer, but I feel like this leaves us with an answer, with the question, which is, can this be a blueprint for what we are doing here, or at least an inspiration to innovate a little bit and mixing it up and making investment in youth entrepreneurship a little bit more participatory? Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Andre. So there we have a case where a government was taking a new approach to distributing financing to entrepreneurs using crypto assets, blockchain, and through at least a partly democratic process. So you can ask questions now. There are some in the chat, so I will start to pick some of them off. There are some questions about the incubator program at the University of Porto. There's a question about who are the participants? Is there any information on the gender, types of companies, etc.?
Yeah, I saw the questions. Thank you. I was just not answering because I wanted you to pay attention to Andre. I was trying to get the numbers. I don't know by heart, but we don't do really positive selection, okay? And this gender issue is something that we pay attention. We count, but truth is that majority of our entrepreneurs are male entrepreneurs. I don't know the numbers by heart. I will take the 15 minutes break to double check the numbers, and then I'll type it here on the chat so that you have real numbers, okay? And then the survival rate. So what we measure, and we do measure every 2 years, is financial impact. So we have turnover, export rates, and investments. I can share with you some documents that we have that are public so that you can see what is happening every 2 years at UPTEC, and we see that the numbers are increasing. So it means that happily, and it's good, our companies are having increased turnover, and you see that they more than 50% of our, so the turnover from our companies, more than 50% of it comes from exportation. But I don't have, let's say, 80%, 90%, a number. This is something that we don't measure on our companies, okay? And well, I would say that my intuition tells me that, of course, yes, some of our companies, they don't survive. Most of the times what happens is that they pivot. It's not that they close for good. Of course, there are some cases, but most of the times what happens is that they have to pivot to survive. Then, David, if you allow me, I'll get quickly to the other questions that you go for break. Then what's the difference between the projects and the startups and companies? So truth is that a project can be something coming from a company, or it is not yet a startup. So we do have internally incubated at UPTEC teams of people with a business idea, but without a company created. Okay, so we call that a project. It can also be called a startup, yes, but we call it a project. Then we have startups, which is roughly the same thing, but already with a company incorporated, so a legal entity. And we also have big companies that have more than one project. So they are big enough to have internally different projects that can later turn into different spin-offs from the same mother company. So that's why we prefer to mention projects, because it really quantifies the number of innovative business ideas that are installed at UPTEC. And then Andre, next question is to you.
I would just like to add something that Karin addressed, which is the type of companies that we have, because we also support companies in the fields of creative industries. So that relates to the fact that we are a result from what the university has been doing. And for instance, the Faculty of Architecture in Porto has 2 Pritzker Awards, architects Álvaro Siza and architects Sotomora. So that kind of work that has been done on academic level translates to what we've been doing in UPTEC. So we also support arts, architects, design, game design, audiovisuals, performative arts. The thing here is that we support entrepreneurs. In general, all artists, I would say, are entrepreneurs. They have to have a business plan. They have a product. They need to market it themselves as, at least as freelancers. We usually look into projects that can be incorporated or that can be cooperative associations, but they need to have a business model to be sustainable. So that's what we look into when we engage new projects. And that's what we do, because we work at this stage that is not so early stage. It's I would say it's a seed stage, even for architectural studios and so forth. What we have is our acceleration programs, which is really pre-seed, MVP stage, where we create teams and we develop products, and those also translate into tech, health, and arts or CCSI companies or products or services. I don't know if this answers the question, but
all right, thanks Andre. I see Julien has his hand up, and I'll turn to him in 2 seconds. Just an encouragement to everyone to either raise your hand or enter questions in the chat. I'm holding some back. I've got questions myself, but we'll go to Julien next.
Yes, thank you, David. A question for Andre. Yes, the GovTech initiative you mentioned and presented is very interesting, and it seems that it has a huge symbolic impact in terms of democratic exercise, and also as it gives examples to the youth about entrepreneurship and how motivating it can be. But probably it has a less of a weight for a structural support policy for young entrepreneurs, because I think of course to all the non-winners of the contest. So I guess that this measure can be coupled nicely with more structural measures support, like with business incubators for all the non-winners, because as you have a kind of critical view on this initiative, could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. I would go a little bit further on how the program could have been used. I mean, participation, as I said, this kind of simulation of investment and crowdfunding, it's a really interesting way of looking into other types of impact besides return of investment. And I believe that for business return of investment, it's in general what investors look for. But if we're talking about policy, we also need to look into impact and to be a little bit more creative on all the intangible results that this process might have. So in that sense, I would say that for sure, not only looking into all the other projects that were voted by citizens that they found value, because that serves as at least some kind of pre-market validation. You know, we are looking into people who are immediately interested in this product, so that tells us something. But also, if there was money allocated to it, why not consider a pre-screening a little bit more robust, let's call it like that, and then transfer the power of investing directly to the citizens who claim the token. You know, if we already did some, what I mean by this is reverse the process. If the jury already validated the business model and the potential sustainability of the project, why not then let the people decide who to be invested in, you know, and transfer some value to the tokens and let the crowdfunding be done by participatory citizenship. This is where I felt that the Portuguese government could go a little bit further on and be a little bit more creative, because they already did the most impressive part, which was the technological part. You know, there was blockchain, there was crypto assets, there was transfer of power to people, but I feel like they were not able to take the step further and be a little and rethink the whole model, and they fell a little bit traditional in the end.
All right, thank you, Andre. I'm going to ask one of my questions now, which is, you know, with regards to the pitching by the investors, you know, and the bringing together of young entrepreneurs and investors through the incubator. Do you have any feedback from investors in terms of the projects they did not invest in and why they did not invest in the project? Are there any lessons we can learn from that and share with the policymakers and policy influencers here? And perhaps we can think about how we can address some of those gaps, let's say.
Yeah, so definitely that's one of the most important things that we do, not only by the curation, but in the end, we also always ask for feedback from the investors who come in and participate in these events. In general, what happens is they feel like companies are not yet in a stage that are investable, so they need to develop a little bit more. But still, they find it really valuable because they get them into their radar really early on. You know, so they start preparing investment rounds for a few months ahead. And that's why we do this event every 3 months at least. We invite a lot of investors, and it's one of those things that it doesn't, well, they don't stop asking for doing it, you know, because in the end we are feeding their pipeline, and that's really, really, really relevant. I don't know if, Francisca, you have more feedback you want to share? Yeah, I believe that was it. In general, right. It's this, they are really good products, or they are this or that, but they are still not investor ready. That tells us that maybe we need also to look into other types of investors that invest not only in Series A, Series B, or seed stage, but also looking into pre-seed for the stage of companies that we have in.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple minutes left for Q&A before we take a break. So we'll go to Karen, who's got her hand up. Karen?
Yeah, I'm sorry for that, but I cannot refrain. I want to say that I think, thank you, the organizers, for letting us have 2 practical examples, because that's very good. I think it's a good start that we start talking to each other about our examples, and they are good examples, I think. So thank you for the presentation of the 2 cases. And I think that when we look at financing, one of the things with young entrepreneurs is that they don't have that much experience, even if they are on the academic level. This is very often their first or maybe second try at starting a company or setting up a company. And investors I mean, investors of all kinds, be it official state or public investors or private investors, they tend to look at the money, only on the money on quite short term. And the long-term perspective for a VC, for instance, seemed to be less than 10 years. And setting up a company is oftentimes you think of doing something that has value for a long time. And I especially like the GovTech initiative because the market isn't that interested in short-term financial feedback. The market is interested in customer value on short or long term, like the fire watchers you were talking about. And I was part of setting up the incubator at Stockholm School of Economics. And then I remember we had a competition once where we had Sweden's most important capitalists judging the companies, and they didn't choose Klarna because they said they are not going to make it. And I mean, Klarna is obviously the most successful company we ever had in the incubator. But the students, they voted for Klarna because they saw the consumer value of having a simple way of paying when you buy on the internet. So I think that when we talk about capital, we should have intelligent capital, especially for young entrepreneurs, because not that they lack intelligence, but being quite unexperienced entrepreneurs, sometimes they will lose their courage when VC investors and the like are not interested in their ideas, which may be very good and from a market perspective. So I think that we should keep that in mind, that the investor perspective is not always the best from a business point of view, so to speak. Do you see my point?
Mm-hmm. No, that was great. Thank you, Karen. Some good insights, and you're right. There are some parallels from your experience in Stockholm with the example, the first one we saw in Porto. So thank you for sharing that. We'll go to George quickly, and there's one more question in the chat, but we'll pass to George now. George.
Yes, thank you, David. And before I ask my question, thank you, Karin, for your comment. Really fascinating and good to be said. So I have quite a question regarding the reverse pitching. Most founders, when they hear that an angel investor or venture capital partner is present at an event or a program, they are eager to go and speak to them just to raise awareness about their idea. Do you believe that with the process, the reverse process you have created, founders are more reluctant to talk to investors? And what goes to their mind first is that they see, oh, this investor is a good fit for us, or this investor doesn't invest in what we're doing, so it's not useful to have an introduction and have a further discussion. Do you believe that the selection process is filtered better, and at the end, all the discussions that are being made are more viable? Yeah, I don't know, what has been your experience in terms of that?
Okay, I'll open my mic, and then if Andrei wants to add something, he will add. Yeah, truthfully, it's true. Yeah, they are eager to speak to everyone, and sometimes what happens is that they go and chat with VCs that do not match what they're doing. So truthfully, that's the reverse pitching. It helps even the startups to filter who they will approach on the networking session. Okay, so that helps on a way, so that VCs don't lose time with the startups that do not match with their investment thesis. And even the startups, they also save time just going to the ones that will invest in the type of product or service that they are developing. And then so yeah, I think it was your question, right? Yeah, the two things. Yeah, so it helps. And then the filter, what's the selection, as it was mentioned, the curated 101. So that is just a second layer, right? So truth is that it happens prior, right? So because we announced the event with the VCs, and then startups, they registered for the 101 session before listening to them. So we business developers, we do this curation beforehand. So when they go to the event, they know already who are the VCs with whom they will be able to have those 30 minutes privately. Of course, they can use the networking part to do informal conversations, but the 30 minutes, it's settled beforehand, and it's us, business developers at UPTEC, who do this curation. So, so we do this first step, and then if still they would be really keen to speak with that VC, when they are present at the reverse pitching, then they realize that, okay, so I was not accepted for that 101 session. And in fact, it makes sense because they knew beforehand that I was not matching. So truth is that both things, they match each other, but we run it on different stages.
I see. Thank you for the info. And what is your model to get an understanding? Is it something that you have a limit to how many startups take part in the whole program? And I didn't get whether all the startups that hear the sales pitching of the partners are also matched with at least one partner.
So we do have a limit, which is time. So they come for an afternoon. So we have a limit of time. So that's our limit. We also have a preference criteria. So although we usually open the reverse pitching to everyone. So even companies that are not at UPTEC can be at the reverse pitching. But then the curated 101, first we put our company. So the incubated companies from UPTEC, they got served first. Okay, so and then if we don't have anyone in-house that is looking for funding and that it's matching and that there is willing to talk with those VCs, and we have a request from someone else, not from our community, but there's free time, then we allow them to go. But we always mention first to the VCs that it's kind of, we don't know, these guys, it's up to them. They are not part of our community. Also to validate that there's kind of, it can be quality 1 and quality 2, so that we back our companies, but just our companies.
I see. So it wouldn't be also relevant to open it to the public and also have something done virtually, because then
yeah, you know, they pay us our salary, so they have to see a value, and the value that they have is that they are first and they have access to something that others don't have. So and this is one of the things that they get value from it, so that they got served first and they receive support beforehand. And if they don't pay attention, we knock their door and we say, hey, we know that you're looking for funding, pay attention. You have to be there on that day at that time. So this is how we work.
Great.
All right, great.
And sorry, David, for the additional
question.
No,
that's fine. That's great. Thanks for the questions and thank you for the answers, Francisco. We're going to take a break now. Okay, a break for 15 minutes. We hope that was enjoyable and interesting to everyone. 2 concrete examples, different approaches, illustrating different ways in which public actors can help facilitate access to young people. So we will come back in 15 minutes for group activity. 15 minutes, so that's 3:48. We're going to have a short scenario where we can work together in 2 different groups on a little challenge, drawing inspiration from what we've heard already today and also from your experience. And I'll just note, Francisca, that I think there's a question or 2 in the chat. If you've got a minute, perhaps you could respond in the chat. Otherwise, you know, we're happy to carry this discussion on via email or other channels. Okay, that's it. Time is up. Let's take a break, stretch our legs, and get away from the screens for 15 minutes. See you back shortly. we're coming towards an end of the session today. I wanted to just reflect on a couple of points that stood out to me, and then I'll pass it over to Helen and Julian to wrap up. The first is that, we tried to cover a big issue today, access to finance. Obviously, we can't cover every element of it. And we've tried to take the 3 different groups into slightly different directions with the hope that each of you would be able to go onto the website to see what the others did and to pick out a few points from the workshops, even if you didn't attend all of them. So the first one yesterday focused on microfinance. So if that is of interest to you, you can go look at the recording, which will be up on the website in a few days, I suppose, and then we'll be picking up the main points in the note that we're going to be adjusting. So we'll take the background note that was circulated to you and we'll add to it content from the different workshops. And then the session tomorrow, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on crowdfunding and some of the new approaches around sourcing debt and equity from the crowd, not just a small number of sources. So that's just to advertise a little bit what the other groups are doing. But regardless of the issue or the mechanism, there are some really important points to consider. The first one is targeting. Who is really the target for the support? And that's a really big question for governments and for program managers. And it's really important not to go too narrow and not to go too wide. If you go too wide, you don't really have a clearly defined objective. If you go too narrow, you're going to have to compromise in order to spend your budget. And I can think of a few examples where programs have gone wrong because the target group was too small and they couldn't reach the target group. Then they had to bring in anybody they could to the program. And of course, that defeats the whole purpose of setting up a really tailored and targeted approach. The second big point is the phase of the business, let's say. With financial support, we've got to be, I think, specific about the stage of business that we want to support with financing. Are we doing really, really early stage pre-startup activities? Are we doing those who are in the process of starting a business, or more those who are looking to grow an existing business? Those are quite different activities and require different amounts of support and different types of wraparound support. So that is another important decision points. The third point is partnerships. This came up a lot in our discussion around microfinance, but I think it applies to almost every type of financial support that the public sector is granting or giving out. And that is to work with the private sector to leverage their expertise, to use their experience in working with target groups, to use their experience in assessing business ideas, and to use their experience in providing additional supports. Working together, such as the pitch, where they had the public-private foundation, can help make schemes more successful because we're leveraging the strengths of different actors. And then the final point is about monitoring and evaluation, the classic OECD point. It comes back to targeting and setting out the objectives at the beginning. I think it's really important to have a clear idea about what the support scheme is trying to do. And then that will enable you to make an assessment against whether the objectives were achieved. So you need to think right at the beginning about how you're going to actually do that. What information are you going to collect regularly to monitor whether spending the money as planned, whether it's going to where it's being intended to go. And then there are certain points in time where you probably want to take a closer look and see whether the scheme is having an impact. Is it being effective? Is it efficient? And how do you use the information coming out of that? all of that is critical, and you need to think about all of that right at the very beginning. So I will stop there. It's been a long afternoon, but a good afternoon, a fun afternoon. We've done a lot.